I've been working on this program for a long time, and it's got more twists and turns in it than the road to Big Bear. The story of the Cotton Club and Frank Sebastian. The story behind the Cotton Club and Frank Sebastian starts in all places, the Piedmont region of Italy. It's a small town called Bagnolo. It's there that Frank Sebastiano was born on the 9th of January in 1896. The Sebastiano family, including Frank and his older brother Giuseppe Sebastiano, immigrated to Calgary, Canada in the early 1900s and then eventually entered the U.S. at the port of Seattle, Washington on December the 17th of 1917. Frank was young, bright, and ready to seek his fame and fortune in the land of opportunity. And seek and find he did. Upon landing in the United States, Frank was required to register for the draft, as the U.S. was involved in World War I. At this time, he was living in San Francisco, working as a bartender while studying hotel and cafe management at a business college. I found no record of Sebastian being drafted or serving in the military because the war ended very soon. Frank continued to work in the bar and restaurant business, which led him to Los Angeles and the Ambassador Hotel. Here he became involved in the opening of the Coconut Grove. That's quite an accomplishment. In April of 21, handsome and debonair Frank Sebastiano, now known as Frank Sebastian, was very successful at the Coconut Grove, and it's where he worked as a manager for some years. The Grove was a showplace and watering hole for local celebrities, the wealthy, and Hollywood film stars. The early Academy Awards were held at the Grove for 5 times, beginning in 1930. As a matter of fact, in 1954, I worked at Warner Brothers on a Judy Garland version of A Star is Born. This included scenes at the Coconut Grove and the Academy Awards. They portrayed Judy at the awards ceremony. It became evident that Judy was unable to work during the day and shoot and sleep at night. So the studio was forced to build the Grove set and shoot the sequence on the stages in Burbank. It would have been impossible to shut the Grove down for all the nights that we needed to film the scenes. The Coconut Grove was replicated in minute detail, and we shot all the scenes involving Judy at night, on stage. Another small note is that all of the coconut trees throughout the restaurant were props that the Grove purchased from the Rudolph Valentino movie, The Shake. Judy Garland was having her problems during this production, which caused the film to go way over schedule. But in the end, what a voice she had, and a wonderful performance. She was nominated for an Oscar, but she lost out to Grace Kelly in The Country Girl. It's written that Judy never got over this loss, and neither did many of her fans. She did win a juvenile Oscar in 1939 for The Wizard of Oz. Judy later performed at the Grove to sold-out concerts. It's interesting to me that Renee Zellweger won an Oscar for portraying Judy Garland, and Judy didn't win an Oscar for portraying Esther Blodgett in the film A Star is Born. That's the Academy Awards. Prohibition at that time was in full swing in the country. But on nights when there were large parties at the Grove, cars would show up at the restaurant rear door with suitcases of booze to satisfy the needs of the thirsty patrons. It was all done in a very discreet way and placed under the table out of sight for their use. Sebastian thrived in this atmosphere, and it prepared him for the next challenge, and he was ready to move on. Using his skills and experience he acquired at the Grove, Sebastian moved on and opened his own restaurant called the Cafe Sebastian. It was located at 23.5 Windward Avenue in Venice, California. The picture on the right has nothing to do with this program. I just liked it. It is from Venice, however. Art Varian's orchestra, who was a big orchestra at the time, was hired to provide the music, and an assortment of entertainers filled the bill. The cafe opened to great success, and things were looking good for this little Italian immigrant until December of 1925. The LA City Council decided to pass an ordinance banning dancing in restaurants. That took a toll on businesses like Frank's and other Venice establishments. As if prohibition wasn't bad enough of a problem, it finally gave Frank an opening to look around for another challenge. And it didn't take him long. He found one. Some of you probably thought, and even I thought, that the only cotton club in Culver City was at Washington and National Boulevard. Well, where the Green Mill was at the old days. Well, that's not the case. Whitey Hendry, who became the chief of police of the MGM Studio Police Department, shown here with Tom Neal and Ruth Hussey, you might remember him, and John Mellart leased the old Moonlight Gardens at 6235 Washington Boulevard, just west of La Cienega. You remember this one? It was in my last program about bars and bistros. They completely remodeled it into the Cotton Club. The grand opening was held on New Year's Eve, 1926. The club featured all black entertainment. V. Elkins and his band performed plantation melodies and jazz dancing music. There was a $3 cover charge, and a special New Year's Eve dinner was $2.50. Now, can you imagine $5.50 to see top entertainment in a small venue, including dinner, and now you pay hundreds to sit in a stadium? But wait a minute, something's going to happen. In less than 45 days, another article in a local paper trumpets that the Cotton Club, with Frank Sebastian in charge, will reopen on the 18th of February, 45 days later. What happened? There was no mention of Hendry or Mallard. It seems they both disappeared. The article further stated that Sebastian will operate both of his venues, the Cotton Club, formerly the Moonlight Gardens, and Sebastian's Cafe in Venice. Frank Sebastian sure gets around. So let's see how this is going to turn out. Now I need to go back in time for a moment to the year 1923, when local contractor Dan Coombs, who was twice mayor of Culver City, and Louis Spielman started construction of a new club in Culver City to be called the Green Mill. I love this. This is a full-sized replica of the billboard that was out in front of it at National and Washington advertising the coming of this restaurant. That's a painting, but it shows, Dan Combs' name and stuff like that. It's amazing what they spent just on that. Even the billboard was impressive. It was located in a large acreage at the corner of National and Washington Boulevard, and the building was built partly in the city of Culver City and partly in the city of Los Angeles, which made it unique. LAPD and Culver City PD each had their own door to enter when they raided the club. The cash register was put on wheels, and it would be moved wherever it needed to be moved to avoid whatever city police department showed up. You always had to think ahead to stay afloat. Spielman operated the Green Mill until 1926, when it started to fall on hard times. He was $180,000 in debt. Now, once again, enters young Frank Sebastian. He approached the debt holders with a proposition and tried to convince them that he was a big shot wheeler dealer and could turn this whole thing around. The bankers gave him 6 months to accomplish the task and pay off at least part of the debt. He changed the name from the Green Mill to Frank Sebastian's New Cotton Club and promptly closed the original Cotton Club at the Moonlight Gardens. He kept the formula featuring all black entertainment, which was styled after the Cotton Club in New York's Harlem district. Frank was off and running again at Washington and National. Are you with me so far? According to newspaperman George Lewis in his column Cinematters, Frank accomplished all this with a total investment of $3.60, which was for a banner he had made which read, "Under New Management." The year ended with most of the debt paid off and Sebastian a $300,000 winner. Turning a $360 investment into $300,000 was a drama in business that was seldom bested, and you can see that in the top of the article on the right. Lewis wrote that in his column. Also, according to Lewis, Sebastian would often loan money to the patrons of his club when they needed it. This kept them hanging around and spending more. Another trick was calling everyone by their first names and playing to their egos. Frank had a great memory, but he kept a little red book where he scrawled their names and kept his accounts. He learned very quickly when to and when not to recognize a celebrity, usually by the expression on their face. Sebastian always said that advertising was one of the secrets to his success. Ads were placed in all the local papers and on radio, listing the great talent that appeared at the club. Carolyn Snowden was a headliner along with V. Elkins and his band. Frank had 3 different bands on 3 different dance floors, plus 4 different reviews with a cast of 42. I mean, that's a pretty good show for the price. Frank used the serpentine melee dance, where everybody gets behind each other and goes all through the restaurant. He used that as a big gimmick to get everybody up and meeting everybody and getting enjoying together, so they all had a great time, and the customers loved it. All the clubs in Los Angeles at that time were required to close at 2 o'clock, except in Culver City. There you could stay open all night. And Frank would serve breakfast of ham and eggs to hundreds of patrons who could last all night. Sebastian's staff of French and Southern chefs became famous for their great Southern cuisine. They said it had to be eaten to be described. It was that good. Good food, good entertainment made for good business in a magical atmosphere. Sebastian had created the most unique resort and venue on all the boulevards, according to the Venice Vanguard, despite Prohibition and the Depression. Sebastian always parked a shiny limo and other fancy newer cars in front of the club to show off and let everybody know he had the best clientele. He was a great showman, and he never tried to hide it. The new Cotton Club became one of the best jobs for musicians because it was a 7-day-a-week job and it was steady. The Creole Beauties were a big hit. They did a great Hawaiian number, amongst other things, and sang and danced their way to fame, backing up Miss Carolyn Snowden. Customers flocked to the club to see and be seen. 3 big shows each night he advertised, and 3 big shows each night he delivered. Nobody went home disappointed. Look at those costumes. I mean, you don't see that nowadays. Maybe Lady Gaga. Sebastian's new Cotton Club became a magnet for attracting the best talent in the country, and this was led by Miss Carolyn Snowden. She was also known as Creole Carolyn and California's Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker was a very famous early singer, lived in Paris. Carolyn, who was born in Oakland, California in 1900, pursued her dream of becoming a famous performer, singer, and dancer from an early age. She worked in jazz clubs in Los Angeles and all over the country before headlining at the soon-to-be legendary New Cotton Club. She also acted in films and worked with the legendary director and actor Erich von Stroheim. Carolyn performed in 24 feature films from the silent era into the advent of sound, including the 1927 MGM hit In Old Kentucky. On this film, she had an on-screen love affair with co-star Stephen Fetchit, who was appearing in his first film. This was a groundbreaking first for black actors in Hollywood production. Carolyn continued performing at the Cotton Club with her revue in addition to pursuing her film career. Later, in 1926, Frank brought Art Blondivarian and his orchestra back to take over to manage the Venice Cafe, along with Louis Spielman, the original owner of the Green Mill. That was an interesting choice. They shared entertainers, and Carolyn Snowden and her Creole singers performed at the grand reopening of the Venice Cafe. The ordinance prohibiting dancing was rescinded, making a lot of people happy. Both the Venice Cafe under Spielman and various management and the Cotton Club under Frank's watchful eye drew standing room-only crowds. Things at the Cotton Club were getting hotter all the time, with new acts and musicians heading the bill. Sebastian brought in Les Height to lead the Cotton Club band, featuring at different times Lionel Hampton, Dizzy Gillespie, Fats Waller, T-Bone Walker, Cab Calloway, Duke Ellington, there with Frank, and of course, Louis Armstrong. Lionel Hampton acknowledged in an article, he stated he started at the Cotton Club at the age of 18 with the band led by Les Height. Height fronted the band at the Cotton Club, and it became known as Sebastian's Cotton Club Orchestra. Height later toured with the band, but sadly only recorded a few of the numbers that they were famous for. Louis Armstrong, soon known as Satchmo, came to Los Angeles from Chicago in 1930 and signed to appear at the Cotton Club for a 9-month engagement. Frank Sebastian wanted some fresh music from the band, and Armstrong more than filled the bill. Lionel Hampton recalled Sebastian introducing Armstrong as the world's greatest trumpet player and Hampton as the world's fastest drummer. Armstrong and Hampton became a magical combination. Armstrong's big hit of the time was, you ready for this one? Ding Dong Daddy. It became one of his signature songs for that era. Armstrong ended up recording many of his best hits at the time at the Cotton Club. The 9-month stint at the club was such a huge sensation, he came back in 1931 for a return engagement. It was during this 1931 engagement that Louis had a bit of a problem. During an intermission, he and drummer Vic Burton were out in the parking lot smoking pot, which was in violation of the state's Poison Act. Armstrong and Burton were busted by 2 plainclothes policemen. I don't know whether it was Culver City or LA, because I don't know what side of the parking lot they were on. They were arrested and taken to jail. Armstrong was worried about getting roughed up and hurting his lip and damaging his career. As it turned out, the cops were big fans of his, and he was treated with great respect with no rough stuff. At his trial, Louis was sentenced to 30 days, but spent 9 days in jail with the rest of the sentence suspended. After his release, he returned to the Cotton Club as if nothing had happened. Armstrong's biographer later wrote that he thought the arrest was a setup by a rival club that was interested in obtaining Armstrong's services. In 1968, I had an opportunity of working with Louis Armstrong for my first and only time on the film version of Hello, Dolly. Armstrong came to Fox Studios to do a duet with Barbra Streisand of the title song from the film Hello, Dolly, which was also a big hit for Satchmo. They pre-recorded the song on the music stage a few days prior. Then on the day the number was scheduled to be filmed, Armstrong arrived at the stage door at Fox Studios in a large limousine. He was greeted and entered the stage where all was ready for the number to be filmed. After the usual intros and photos with the cast and the director, Gene Kelly, the signal was given for the cameras to roll, start the playback, and one of the greatest duets I've ever heard proceeded without any mistakes. Kelly had Louis do one more close-up and then told him he was wrapped in the film. I had the pleasure of escorting Satchmo off the stage to his waiting limo while the cast and crew gave him a beautiful standing ovation. It was truly one of the highlights of my career, and it was done and over in about an hour. Jim Heyman writes in his book, Out with the Stars, which is going to be our door prize tonight, that Washington Boulevard was the hot location for bootleggers, gamblers, and vice, with places like the Moonlight Gardens, which became the Cotton Club, which was the Oriental Palace, which was, they changed names like, who knows? Remember that one, not that, the original Cotton Club, Ford's Castle, King's Tropical Inn, one of the best restaurants in Culver City, and the Who's Gal. I love the Who's Gal. I mean, if I was to open a bar, this is what I'd open. He also lists such joints, and take this, the Monkey Farm, Midnight Frolics, Harlow's Cafe, and the Chicken Roost. I managed to find some of the photos of some of these establishments, but not all of them. It's getting pretty hard to find stuff from back in that era. Okay, now let's get back to the Cotton Club. Frank Sebastian became known as the King of Cabaret, and rightly so. He presented the greatest of black entertainment in a setting not to be equaled. Gambling, although illegal, was of course discreetly available in the back room. Drinks were served, also illegal, as all speakeasies did, so as not to draw a lot of attention from the authorities. Now and then the police would drop by, I don't know which side, Culver, LA, for a look-see, but it all seemed to go well. Frank was a smart businessman, and he made it a point to cater to the respectable side of Culver City and local society. The host with the most. I love that. Some of the events held at the club included the Bay District Lions Club monthly dinners. The Elks Club hosted a 3-day frolic at the club with Max Fisher's orchestra of 18 pieces. Culver Police Chief Cecil Truchell hosted 250 members of the Fire and Police Protective Association from 30 nearby cities. A great time was had by all. Not to be outdone, the Culver City Women's Association, Women's Club, had a Bridge Tea and Style show luncheon, hosted by Culver City icons like Mabel Tellefson, a familiar name here in Culver City, Miss Pearl Merrill, and Laura Peralta, the owners of the Peralta Theater. The event featured beautiful dresses from the French studio. The Cotton Club also hosted luncheons for the Kiwanis Club, the Chamber of Commerce in Culver City. If you wanted to throw a great affair, Sebastian was there to make it happen. The Culver City's Policeman's Ball in 1927 was held at the club, and the turnout was overwhelming. Sorry, we couldn't find a really good quality photo on that one. Success of the Cotton Club was not by accident. That's Sebastian on the motorcycle on the right, in front of his club. Sebastian worked hard and used his experience to give the customers what they wanted. There are a few fun stories that come out of the club through the years. One story had Robert Lowenstein, an heir to $40 million Belgian fortune, running up a $14 tab at the club. When the waiter presented him with a check, Lowenstein said he was short of cash, and he would sign the check. The waiter said, "Cash or I keep your overcoat." Well, a fight ensued and the customer lost. The waiter kept the coat. Lowenstein later sued the club and he lost again. He said he would pick up his coat when the allowance arrived, all in a day of Culver City nightlife. Sebastian kept a pretty tight lid on his clubs, and things rarely got out of hand. In the 30s, such entertainers as the Mills Brothers appeared often at the Cotton Club. On the 27th of January in 34, the club honored world-famous dancer Sally Rand. A few of us may remember her. The Mills Brothers were featured at this event. Another side note that I remember was that a few years back, we would often see one of the remaining Mills brothers, John Mills on the left, at Rita Ziti's Rollin' Rye, everybody knows a Rollin' Rye, having dinner with his son, John Jr. What a talent the Mills brothers were. I really do, however, miss Rita Ziti and the Rollin' Rye. The Panera is okay, but I really miss the Rollin' Rye. I wanted to do a program about the Rollin' Rye, but the day I went to speak to Rita, she said, "Oh, I'm closing the deli." I said, "Oh, and retiring." It would have made a great program. I still may do it. For Sebastian, it was smooth sailing for a time until the end of Prohibition in 1933. The Cotton Club and 32 other establishments were refused the right to sell alcohol by the new state board. This refusal would be in effect until they could prove they were ready to obey the new laws. At this time, the then city clerk, Paul Jarrett, who became our postmaster and was my neighbor on Wesley Street, was unable to accept Sebastian's check for $900 for his license because it did not include a $90 late fee. The late fee was paid and the liquor permit was issued. Later, the state went after Sebastian again, alleging conduct contrary to public welfare and morals. Sebastian denied that gambling was going on in the club. What else would he say? And he always applied and received his license through the normal means. Frank and his manager, Walter Pollack, were called in front of the Senate committee a number of times for questioning in the liquor probe in Los Angeles. Frank and Walter would sit through the probe and refuse to even speak. This stopped the show as seen by this headline, but the pair were ultimately jailed for contempt for refusing to testify, causing Sebastian's attorney, Arthur Verge, to file a writ of habeas corpus. I love that word. It sounds like a Halloween movie starring Boris Karloff. Habeas corpus. The two were soon freed. They were in and out of court, however, on an assortment of violations, but they always managed to come out on top. The committee questioned Orpha Jean Shantz, I love that name, with the liquor board as to why there was a problem with Sebastian's license. When she passed the club with a clean bill of health all the years past, she had no answer. I think myself that it was probably much easier for Sebastian to operate during Prohibition than it was under the new laws of the government. The Cotton Club operated successfully at the location, but Sebastian was always looking for something new, and he had another idea and added an additional venue to be known as the London Club. Next door to the Cotton Club, but in the same building, his plan would be to headline talent from England. Apart from the newspaper ad, there's not much available about the London Club. It looks like you had a lot of people coming and everything was going to be great. He also stated in a news article that he was going to reopen Fatty Arbuckle's failed Plantation Cafe. I never knew that. The article said in 1934, on the 4th of July, it was going to open, it was going to be called the Chez Paris. It would be a dine and dance palace, moderately priced and catering to the local patrons and family parties. But after doing the plantation program, which I did last year, and all the research I did, I couldn't find anything to verify that this place ever opened as the Chez Paris. If somebody knows better than me, let me know, because I can't find anything on that. In the mid-30s, Frank headlined the Valida Snow and her cast of 45 beauties. She acted, sang, and even impersonated Louis Armstrong, playing the trumpet equally as well as Armstrong. It was said she led the chorus and the orchestra at a furious pace and was described as poetry in motion. Valida Snow. Cab Calloway and his Heidi-Ho Orchestra was a frequent act at the club. The show was featured on the radio station KHJ and KFAC. I don't even know if they exist anymore. Directly from the Cotton Club every night. He performed his hits. Now, you ready for this? Minnie the Moocher, Kicking the Gong Around, the Scat Song, and Lady with a Fan. I mean, you don't find song titles like that today. Duke Ellington also appeared with a cast of 40 plus Snake Hips Tucker. That's Duke there with Frank at the club. Sebastian would often have special guests of honor, such as cartoonist Sidney Smith, the creator of Andy Gump, and others. He had a number of grand openings. He was really good at grand openings, as shown by these newspaper ads. He often added the word new to the name to make everyone feel it was indeed a new grand opening. He was a true showman. Sebastian created the Salon de Vie cocktail room in the Cotton Club to keep things new and different. He added Eleanor Hunt, who co-starred with Eddie Cantor in the film Whoopi, to the guest of honor status for one of his shows. Les Heights Orchestra provided the music for her act. He always wanted to keep the show fresh. Sebastian made every holiday an event, and his New Year's parties were the toast of the town. Never a dull moment at the Cotton Club. Now, in April of 1937, he's got a problem. All the chorus girls at the club wanted to raise and pay, and Sebastian refused. So the girls decided to have a sit-down strike. They came out, and when the band started, they all sat down on the floor. The band kept playing, but to no avail. Sebastian came out of the floor and tried to get the girls up and dancing, and they kept shouting, "No pay, no play." Sebastian was getting very frustrated, and the battle went on. The audience, however, thought it was part of the show, and they loved it. They kept cheering the girls on. Sebastian finally gave in, and the show proceeded. The girls got their $5 a week raise. In 1937, he also featured Earl Hines Orchestra with Ida Mae James and her review featuring Bill Bojangles Robinson doing his famous steps up and down the stairs. Remember the one from the Shirley Temple movie where he went up and down the stairs with Shirley Temple? I mean, that was one of his famous things, was the steps. Not to be outdone, Sebastian had one more grand opening up his sleeve. In June of 1937, with great fanfare, he advertised, "The Cotton Club presents Sebastian's Cafe International." Another celebrity-filled gala set for the 1st of July in 1937 with new entertainers, a new band led by Ben Pollock and Billy Vine as the MC, lavish full-page ads in all the newspapers, lots of beautiful chorus girls direct from movie musicals, the Night Sisters Adagio Act, the skating team of Barrett and Wright. He compared the show to Ziegfeld Follies. How could it miss? Well, despite his success through the Depression and Prohibition, Sebastian finally closed the Cotton Club in 1938 due to financial losses and competition. The property then went through a series of owners that you might remember, and the rebirth as the Casa Manana, the Meadowbrook Gardens, where Harry James used to play, and the Zucca Opera House, which had an oleo vaudeville burlesque type of program, before it burnt to the ground in 1950. This was the end of this page of history. It was never rebuilt. And Zucca, it's said, had no insurance. In October of 1939, Sebastian, not to be held back, opened a new club at 5815 Washington Boulevard. It was named Sebastian's Casita Manana, featuring Kansas City steaks and something entirely different in a cocktail lounge. Maybe a little play off the Casa Manana. What do you think? It didn't last long. A newspaper article from 1940 is going to tell you a really interesting story. This one really gets good. It tells of a suit filed by a sportsman and gambler, Elmer Perry, against police chief Cecil Truchell. It was for $5,000 he allegedly loaned Truchell, who was in business with ex-mayor Arthur Segrell, Frank Sebastian, ex-owner of the Cotton Club, and Frank Doyle, a Los Angeles license enforcement officer. That's a group. The claim was that there was an effort to organize a gambling establishment by the group, and they were all part of it, and he wanted his $5,000 back. All this centered around the Lighthouse Athletic Club, just up the street from the Cotton Club. Truchell admitted he was president of a corporation interested in opening the Sebastian Club at the Lighthouse, but he stated he had resigned from the corporation. He also was suing the city of Culver City for $40,000 for slandering him about his ouster, about his involvement with the Lighthouse Project. In the end, Perry's suit was dismissed. Ex-chief of police Truchell lost his suit against the city, and I find no evidence that the Lighthouse Club ever opened. Truchell was eventually rehired by the Culver City PD as a motor cop. Quite a drop in pay from chief to motor cop. To his credit, Chief Truchell, while in office, created the Juvenile Prevention Association for Young People, which was very popular. It went on for some years. And along with Frank Sebastian, they held events for youth groups and other programs for the good of the community. There they are, having a barbecue for the Cubs. In the end, Sebastian continued to open clubs, and Cecil Truchell lived out his life on the corner of Motor Avenue and Braddock Drive across from Carlson Park. It's interesting for me to note at this point that most of the things that Sebastian got in trouble for in those days are now mostly legal. Gambling, drinking, and smoking pot. Times change. Now, we've got to go back to the 1920s one more time. There was a magnificent 20-room home at 9530 Lucerne Avenue, which I'm sure you remember, yes. It was built by Harry Curly Brown, a Chicago millionaire and horse track builder. This house was to become known as the Egyptian Palace. Has anyone heard of the Egyptian Palace? The story of the Egyptian Palace is in on our wall, and you'll see a whole display in there about the Egyptian Palace. Brown built the house for an Egyptian girl he had met in Egypt. The young girl, while en route to meet up with Brown and see the new house he built for her, died on board the ship. Coming to the U.S., Brown never got over her death and lived many years in despair. In 1928, Brown surrendered to federal authorities in San Francisco on federal charges of the Mann Act, which was transporting a 16-year-old across state lines for obvious purposes. The charges were dismissed a few days later when it was determined it was a blackmail plot. Brown died in Glendale Sanitarium in May of 1930. The heirs of his estate fought over the property so much that they were forced to sell it. Now, guess who bought the house? Anyone? Frank Sebastian. Of course, Frank Sebastian. Who else would buy the Egyptian house? So Frank joined his older brother Giuseppe, who's now Joseph, Joseph's wife Evelyn, and their son Joseph Jr. Also rooming at the palace were Frank's manager at the Cotton Club, as well as the cashier. Kept a close look on the money. It quickly became his personal playhouse with a reputation for celebrity-studded parties. It was very convenient, so it was almost directly behind Selznick Studios. Now, if I can find my pointer. Anyway, this was Selznick Studios water tower, which is now Desert Hill. I couldn't find a good picture. And there is the house in Mill. So it's just behind it. And it was alleged at the time that there was a tunnel that ran from the studio over to the house so that the celebrities could go unseen underground. It's another Culver City tunnel story. They could go over to the house, have their parties, and go back to the studio and not be seen. I can't find anything to support this theory. So I say no tunnel. It does make a great story, though. While they were making Gone with the Wind, it was a convenient place for stars to visit, and it was their home away from home. This went on for some years until the 30s, and Frank was having legal and money problems. And after a decade of living at the palace, he ultimately sold it, and moved to a house nearby. The Egyptian palace changed hands more often than a poker game. It evolved into a flop house, bordello, and a haven for the homeless with rats and vermin moving in as well. The Culver City police were making frequent visits to the property all the time. Now, a quarter of a century after the burning of Atlanta on the nearby 40-acre lot for Gone with the Wind, the Egyptian house was used as a 2-day training program for the Culver City Fire Department. The house was burnt over and over and over again and put out by the fire department until nothing remained except smoldering ruins and a lot of memories. Now, as I said earlier, in our museum, someone, and I don't know who it is, Hope probably knows, salvaged 2 of the pillars from inside the Egyptian house. There they are. There's a better detail of the top of them in the next shot. They're very beautiful. And they're in our museum. You can see them, they're right behind the folding sign thing by the front door. I would have loved to have saved the stained glass depiction on either side of the door of King Tut, but they went up with the house. What a shame. Back in 1939, Frank and his brother Giuseppe, now known as Joseph, were living at 4124 Lafayette. His brother was working at the time at RKO Pathé Studios, which would later become Desilu Culver Lot, as a police officer. I found Frank and his brother living at 3767 and 3769 Hughes Avenue. That's a duplex just across Venice Boulevard, just prior to World War II. Joseph remained in Culver City until he passed away in 1964. He's buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Slauson Avenue. Sebastian, however, traveled between Los Angeles and Sacramento. During this period, he registered for the draft in LA, as well as trying to get the Lighthouse Club off the ground with Cecil Truchell and all the legal problems that came with that venture. In 1940, an ad in the Sacramento Bee newspaper shows that Sebastian had moved to Sacramento and opened a new club called Donovan's Cafe, another one of his endless clubs. It was on 10th Street between J and K Street, dinner, dancing, and exotic entertainment with lots of Hollywood glamour girls. He called it Sacramento's only theater restaurant. He brought in Faith Bacon all the way from Earl Carroll's show in Hollywood to perform in Sacramento. Frank operated the Cafe Donovan all through World War II. During his back and forth between the two cities, Sebastian applied for U.S. citizenship in LA and ultimately became a U.S. citizen on May the 23rd, 1941. Frank moved on from the Donovan Cafe in the late 40s, and he became managing director of the Hotel Senator, facing Capitol Park in downtown Sacramento. Keeping the Sebastian style, Frank featured the best in entertainment and food and continued to play the host with the most from the coast. The Senator Hotel Empress Ballroom did well for Frank, and he did well for the city of Sacramento, even with lots of competition. Frank eventually bought the Hotel Senator. He became president of the Convention Bureau, as well as president of the Sacramento Hotel and Restaurant Association. In 1953, Frank was honored with a testimonial dinner where he was made a lifetime president and director emeritus of the Convention Bureau. Stars and celebrity from the Culver City past attended, as well as local and state officials. Frank later sold the Hotel Senator at a handsome profit. He then turned around and married Effie Hashow of Tarzana, California. On the marriage application, Frank said he was 61 years old and Effie was 41. In 1958, Frank, who never let grass grow under his feet, announced that he and three partners would build a 375-room hotel on 17 acres fronting Highway 40 and Canterbury Road with a 4-acre lake. Now that sounds like a pretty nice place, Vegas style. It was to be called the El Dorado Hotel and the Cafe de Or. Do you believe this guy? I mean, the hotel and nightclub featured top name acts like the Ink Spots with Bill Kenny headlining a huge show. This also became a great success for Frank, and on the 5th anniversary celebration of the opening of the El Dorado, Frank brought his old friend from Culver City days, Louis Satchmo Armstrong, with his all-star band for a 2-night engagement, reuniting the two. This was including the cutting of a huge cake. It was a night to remember, all in Sebastian style, never to be outdone. That's the two of them by the picture that we started one of the programs with. Frank retired from the presidency of the El Dorado in 1965. The remaining partners, however, didn't do quite as good a job as Frank and were soon in financial trouble. So in November of 1969, Frank was forced to return to head up the El Dorado once again and try to save it from foreclosure. All of this was to no avail. The El Dorado was taken back by the creditors, and it became the Wood Lake Hotel. Now, you probably, like me, thought this was the end of Frank Sebastian. No, not quite. A year later, at age 74, Frank and fellow hotel man Arthur Allen of Reno joined forces to lease and open the Lancer Restaurant on Mount Rose Road on the way to Reno. They had a lease with an option to buy. Arthur Allen spoke in glowing terms about his new partnership with Frank Sebastian and stated in an article that Governor Ronald Reagan had appointed Frank Sebastian the official host for the state of California for life. The ads for the Lancer restaurant were also very interesting to me. They first showed Frank and Arthur Allen as hosts in July of 1970. The next ad in September of 1970 shows both men with photos. The next ad in April of 1971 only shows Frank Sebastian's name, and he invites you. And the final ad for Mother's Day, May the 7th, 1971, shows Mr. Frank Sebastian and the Lancer staff wish you a happy Mother's Day. What happened to Alan? The Lancer had become a wholly owned venue of Frank Sebastian. Does there seem to be a pattern here? Maybe. But the most interesting part is what happened on the night of August 2nd, 1971, a night that will live in infamy, when an explosion and fire destroyed the Lancer restaurant completely. The only people at the restaurant at the time of the fire were night watchman Frank Emig and Frank Sebastian Jr., 17 years of age, the only son of Frank and Effie Sebastian. Very interesting coincidence. The cause of the fire was under investigation for days after the blaze, and there were several possible causes being looked at. But in the end, no one I could find was blamed for the fire. After the devastating fire at the Lancer restaurant, Sebastian and his family moved back to Sacramento and lived quietly until his death in 1976 at age 80. He's buried at Calvary Catholic Cemetery in Sacramento. What a life he had with hardly a dull moment. There were some rumors over the years that Fenolio Frank Sebastian had mob ties. I found nothing in my research to verify this claim, but always possible. Sebastian knew how to play the game, and he played it well. He left behind an interesting period of history for a little town of Culver City that will be hard to top for many years to come. So now let's do a little recap of his ventures. He came to LA in 1921 and helped open the Coconut Grove. Next, the Cafe Sebastian in Venice. Next, the original Cotton Club at Moonlight Gardens. Next, the new Cotton Club at the Green Mill. Next, the Concita Mañana. Next, the Lighthouse debacle, the Egyptian House, and it's also written he owned a club called the Cubanola at La Brea and Beverly. I can't find a lot on that one either. Plus a lot of proposed clubs that never saw the light of day. And that's only here in Culver City. Not too bad for an Italian immigrant. I would like to thank Jim Hyman and his wonderful book that we're going to give away tonight for the information that I got from the book, the research and the photos, and someday we hope to meet him. His book is our door prize. Also, I'd like to thank our new best friend, Martin Turnbull, who was here last Sunday at our program about the Orson Welles movie. I'd like to thank Martin for his friendship and his photos through his Garden of Allah book series for that period. And last but not least, I'd like to thank our friends Jim and Pam Ellier of History for Hire Prop House for some of the props that we used in our display in the museum. And that completes this program. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Do you have any idea why they would outlaw dancing? That just like, what?
I have no idea. I have no idea. It was not a popular move by the city council.
I would guess not.
And fortunately, it was overturned pretty quickly.
Thank you.
The Cotton Club near where the Hal Roach Studios were, in that area of Washington and National?
No.
Kitty Corner.
Yeah, well, it was catty corner across the street.
Okay, so across from the...
Where the Metro goes across now, Hal Roach was behind that.
Right.
And across the street on the corner, kind of split on the lot, was the new Cotton Club.
Right, is that where the lumber yard used to be or across?
No, the lumber yards are further down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then what side was LA and what side was Culver City then?
Well, the LA side was, because, Culver City Main Street is split right at the alley. So a third of Culver City Main Street is in LA, and the rest of it's in Culver City. A lot of people think Main Street's all in Culver City, and the line is along Venice Boulevard. It's not. It's really funny. It runs kind of all over the place. So I don't know exactly. I'd have to get a plot map from that period and try to figure out where it's at. But this is all from the research that I got and the people that have written a lot of stuff about it. Yes.
What happened to his son, the 17-year-old junior?
Well, nothing that I can find out. He was never charged with anything, and the fire kind of just went by the wayside. And the son, I don't know. That's a whole nother program.
Who supplied the ice for the Cotton Club?
For the Cotton Club.
Who supplied the ice? Oh, the Pure Ice Company, of course. My godfather. How many of you here saw the Bars and Bistros program? Oh, that's good. If you didn't get to see the Bars and Bistros program, it's kind of a prelude to this one. And it's on our website. If you go to culvercityhistoricalsociety.net or .com, either one, Culver City Historical Society, you go on and you'll see all the information about it. And if you go down just a little ways, it'll say, watch our videos. And all the videos that Mark has done are on that. There's 50 or 60 videos, ranging in size from minutes to hours. The program that we just did a couple of Sundays ago with Lebo, who the author of the Orson Welles book, is already on the program. This program will be on the website probably in 10 days, Mark? Okay. Yeah. give or take. Give or take. Now, he's very fast. He's really good. He's really good at what he does.
Okay. Were there other cotton clubs across the country and they were unrelated?
Yeah, there was a few across the country. The most famous one was in New York. But I've spoken to a lot of people that said the New York one really didn't compare with the one in Culver City. The one in Culver City was bigger, better, and really had a better layout with 3 different dance floors and 3 different stages and stuff. It was huge.
I missed, when did the Egyptian house burn down?
It was in the 64, yeah.
Yeah, no,
It's in on the display.
I think that's about right. I remember climbing over the fence and going around it.
Oh. I think a lot of people did that, yeah.
I've got a question just about Frank Sebastian. So he didn't get married for the first time until he was 61 years old?
He was married when he came to Los Angeles. And I can find nothing about his wife except the fact that she was his wife. And that's on one legal document. It said married, it said yes, it said wife's name, and it gives the wife. But nothing in any of the articles ever mentions his
How
wife.
mysterious.
Only the second wife is mentioned. And as a matter of fact, the second wife, Effie, she was the leaseholder on the club that burnt down in Reno.
Wow.
So it was in her name.
Okay.
I don't know why, but
Thank you.
she was the leaseholder.
I'll be very quick. I'm June Caldwell. I was born in Culver City in 1924. So Sebastian's was open in 26, you said. Okay. So when I was about 7, I skated from my house at Madison and Farragut in front of the house and down the sides. And we kids had a lot of fun talking about his history, Sebastian, because we really didn't know. But I had heard the story that he was in love with an Egyptian woman, and before she could get here, she died.
Well,
And I don't know how true that is, but he was heartbroken.
yeah, that was Curly
And then
Brown.
later on, when I could drink, I went to the Casa Maria. I saw all the guys.
Yeah. Now, the Egyptian girl was related to Harry Brown, Curly Brown, who built the house. And Frank was just an owner, 10 years or so after it was built. Is that it? That's It's an easy night. Now,